It's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Emergency Home Learning Summit. Ken Danford is here with us today. Hi, Ken.
Hello. Thanks for
How are
having me.
you?
I am very well.
Absolutely.
Beautiful day out here in
Ken,
Massachusetts.
I'm glad. What is your job? What do you do?
I am the executive director of North Star, self-directed learning for teens. I run a program that supports teenagers to leave school and embark on homeschooling with the support of a community program here. And so I run the equivalent of a YMCA or community center after school program that is during the day aimed at teens who are miserable in school and helping them declare that yesterday was their last day of school.
Doesn't that scare people?
Yes, terrifies them. I'm like the Pied Piper of doom. I'm like the evil guy in the street corner. I once had a woman snatch the photos of her children away from me and said, "I don't even want to show you the pictures of my children."
Why do you think it's so scary to think about not going to school?
I think it's scary because in a very serious way, schooling and going through the process of regular schooling is like a religion in modern America. Like questioning it is really dubious. It's not something we do, and to come to the conclusion that school is optional is a really threatening, unfamiliar approach to something that is so basic as the very first step to success in America. Um, and so parents aren't ready, kids aren't ready for the most part to question that. They just know that you have to go to school and that not going to school is going to lead you to becoming a dropout who's ruined. And listening to anybody who would recommend such a crazy thing is just a waste of your time.
Is there a process you use for going through that conversation?
It's usually telling my own story of how I learned what I know. How did I discover from my conventional upbringing that school is optional? Because I certainly did not believe that as a kid. I certainly did not believe that when I became a teacher. And so sharing my own journey and sort of bringing people along with me in that thought process is how I do it.
What
And then
was
I
that
just
journey?
then I just bombard them with stories of North Star kids. And then I don't let
What,
them leave until they acknowledge that what I'm saying is true. They don't have to be convinced that it's good for them and their family, but they cannot leave my office thinking that I've made this whole thing up and that I'm lying. They have to acknowledge, okay, I get it. There's some weirdo process by which you've been helping kids. I don't think I want that for my family, but I get it. I believe you. They're not allowed to leave until I get that much from them.
do any of them have to stay overnight?
No. It's friendly.
So what is that? What was your journey?
Well, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, a suburb called Shaker Heights with very good schools. The motto is a community is known by the schools it keeps. There's still well-respected public schools. I went K through 12, all, AP classes, top of the class, more or less. I went to Amherst College, did well. Went to Brown University for teacher training with Ted Sizer's Coalition of Essential Schools program, more or less. And then started teaching first in Prince George's County and then in Amherst, Massachusetts when I moved up here with my wife. Again, Prince George's County was a pretty tough situation, and Amherst public schools were a well-respected college town, what would be considered a good school system, right? And I hit the wall of teaching kids who I decided that the problem was teaching kids who didn't really want to be there, teaching a captive audience, not being allowed to say to kids, if you don't want to be in my class, you don't have to. Because I know how much I resent having to go to things that I don't want to be at or how I feel trapped. I know that as adults, we don't do that to you or to others. There's very few moments in life where you have to, by law, attend an event or, a year long or an 18-year long series of events that you don't want to be at. We don't do that. And we don't do it for good reason because it's a waste of everybody's time. And so asking people what they want to learn became the central focus of my quest. And I didn't know how to do that. I was in a doctorate program at the time to become a principal or superintendent or secretary of education, just to make schools better for everybody. I was really on the, curriculum reform, revisionist history. I was a U.S. history teacher, and I still teach U.S. history at North Star. And I still, really enjoy putting curriculum together for kids who want to be in my history class. But around the time that I really hit the wall, realizing that I don't think I can do this forever, that the cognitive dissonance between teaching about strikes and US history and protests and making the society better contrasted with my role as a school teacher, where I was telling kids to sit down and be quiet and do what I say, and you can't go to the bathroom and take off the hat and stand for the pledge. And if I don't like what you do, I can give you a detention and there's nothing you can really do about it. The whole thing was too much of a contrast for me to live with. And I also began to realize that I couldn't really change it, even if I was a principal or a superintendent. There's not that much that you can do to fundamentally change some of these core assumptions about kids must come 5 days a week, all day through age 18, and doing the traditional school curriculum. There's things at the edges to make it better and nicer and kinder and gentler, of course. And many colleagues and friends have found their niches in schools and certain programs or certain aspects of schooling that are really effective and really meaningful. So I'm not against all that, but I didn't see my way forward for, at age 30 to spend the rest of my career finding a little corner of a system that I didn't really like. And that's when my colleague, Joshua Hornick, gave me a copy of Grace Llewellyn's Teenage Liberation Handbook. That was my first introduction to this other world of homeschooling, unschooling. I knew nothing about it, like literally zero. And I just assumed homeschooling was a crazy thing that isolationist people did to try to, get a leg up on for their kids. And I was blown away by this concept that kids were not only were not going to school, but they weren't even doing school at home, these unschoolers. And that somehow it worked. These kids who just played chess or programmed computers or farmed or raised goats or whatever they were doing, learning Spanish and traveling. They were turning out to be 17-year-olds who were interesting people that were making their way into society quite smoothly. I had no idea this was a thing. And when I discovered that was a thing, for me, the logical reply or response was not to barge in on that lifestyle and try to find those kids and tutor them, because they didn't need me or want me and they weren't going to pay me. The response was, how do I help the school kids that I'm tormenting use this lifestyle too? And that's where Josh and I decided that what our school kids would need to embark on a self-directed learning model approach would be our creating a little community center in town on a bus line with transportation that was affordable and accessible to everyone, that coached their families to file their homeschooling plans, and then, host classes and host tutoring and a social scene and make this whole lifestyle of not going to school appealing and sustainable. And of course, that was 1996, and I'm still doing it because it's awesome.
What are the biggest areas of pushback? What do people want to argue about with that vision?
Well, once I get past it's not actually true. People think, the first thing is people think you must have a high school diploma, right? There's two big areas of pushback. One is, without a diploma, my kid will be left out, or the kid says I will be left out. No one will ever hire me or let me go to college. And it turns out that's just not true. Homeschoolers in the modern homeschooling movement in the past 40 years have been thriving with college admissions in a number of ways. They've been getting part-time jobs and moving on. They've been traveling the world. They've been doing all kinds of interesting things. And nobody's checking them to see whether they have a high school diploma or not. And if there is some kind of absolute boundary for that, most North Star teens take the GED and throw it in the drawer and have that formal document in case they hit a wall, like a FAFSA application, or they want to do the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps or the military, and they don't want a mom's or dad's homeschooling invented transcript. So, the GED is 100% sufficient. But even without it, the world is wide open. So that is a very hard sell. People just think I'm making this up. They've never heard such nonsense before. That anything you can do with an Amherst High School diploma, you can do without one. That anything you can do with a Deerfield Academy diploma, that's the fanciest school around here, you can do without one. That's just gibberish, right? Or it's really for privileged, eccentric folk who can get away with cutting corners, right? They just don't think that's true. So that's number one. The second area of pushback is that without school, my child will never read a book again. They may never read a page of a book again. They may never count or do a math problem again. Without school, my kids will just be dopes who don't do anything because they're lazy little people who only want to play video games, right? And it turns out that's just not true. It's not true that's just not human nature, to be honest with you. And sometimes when kids have been struggling in school and come from a moment of despair, it is true that at first they only play video games or only do the thing that makes them most comfortable. That does happen for some kids for some time, but it doesn't happen for everybody. And given time and space and support, it's human nature to want to be good at things. It's human nature to want to find your way in life and to find a way to contribute and be a participant in the world. And that's hard. It's very hard to do alone. And if you're 14 or 15 or 16, to do it alone with only your mother and father coaching you. There's a role for non-parental adults and a community center and advisors and classes and a North Star type program in the healthiest teen's life. The healthiest kids need it. I would have needed it. My brothers would have needed it, even with our quality parents that I have. So there's a role for having the support one needs to take some risks, to try some things out, to experiment and explore. But the fear is that people will just do none of that unless they're made to by school. And of course, the counter argument, my response to that is that school mostly is shutting that down, not opening life up. It makes making kids just work for a grade. And then, the most of the work they do in school, they throw away at the end of the semester. They don't even save it. It's not that meaningful. School is actually shutting down an exploration of what one really loves, not opening it up. Now, I didn't have all those feelings as a kid. I went to school. I did well. I had friends. I had some extracurriculars. For the most part, I liked going to school. But it's just not necessary.
So besides Grace, were there other voices that really made a difference for you? Did the Ted Sizer Coalition of Essential Schools stuff help you at all?
Ted Sizer did not. Ted Sizer was a school reformer, and that's the world I left behind. That was my track until I met or opened and stumbled into this world of self-directed learning. I read all the John Holt books. They were influential. Pat Faranga at Holt Associates, the Arrow Network. The world opened up for me once I launched myself into it, right? And did my own research. But mostly, no, there weren't other critical people other than my colleague Joshua, who left school with me, and we did this together for the first 7 years. We were kind of out there looking at each other going, what do you think? And I said, I don't know. What do you think? Well, let's try this. And okay, we didn't really have a model. We didn't really have mentors. There was something of an existing unschooling community or network across the country of the writers like John Holt and Susanna Sheffer and the magazine Growing Without Schooling and so on. And Susanna is now a staff member at North Star. But no one really took me under their wing, and I didn't have a guide. Joshua and I just decided we know what we know. We know what we need to do. We need to help the kids from our school and local schools opt out and use this quality lifestyle. And we think we know what we need to offer to help them do that. So let's just do it.
It feels like this is a pretty significant moment historically. A lot of people are having their kids learn at home. They're often frustrated by 7 hours on Zoom, and they're trying to figure out alternatives. Is there another movement where people have shifted from kind of a bureaucratic acceptance of a system to independence that you think is a model for people becoming self-directed learners? Does the food revolution show some of the same signs of independent thinking?
The food revolution, if you mean the growth of organic food, natural foods, vegetarianism, and then veganism, and now, the subsets of gluten-free and so on, the commitment to healthier foods, not having to only consume food from the grocery store, especially packaged and processed foods, and shopping at um, choosing to shop primarily at farmers markets or being a CSA member at a local farm. That food revolution absolutely is a wonderful model. Somewhat in alternative health, with a commitment to opting out of a medical model for every problem and going to more holistic health models. People who choose home birthing over hospital birthing for routine um, birth experiences is another good model. Very historically speaking, it matches up with a lot of the homeschooling issues. I think anybody who says I'm not going to participate in mainstream American culture in this one area, whether it's you're not going to shop at chain stores or fast food chains, and you're only going to buy local. Any element when you're stepping out of the way normal mainstream America does it, is a useful analogy to being like, oh, really? You don't have to go to school till 18 and get that diploma? Are you serious? There's a workaround? I didn't know that. Oh, well, if you've been open to the other workarounds with everything else, then this will flow naturally.
And most of those other movements, they're not systemic large scale change. They're not reform. They're usually individuals connecting with other individuals and telling a story. Did you have any other individuals, not from books, but just individuals where that storytelling helped you?
Oh, absolutely. But it's all from the bottom up. It's all from other people who were the pioneers of homeschooling and unschooling. So back in 1995, 96, I read all the books that existed back then about homeschooling and unschooling. The Colfax's Homeschooling for Excellence, which was a classic then. David Guterson, Family Matters, Why Homeschooling Makes Sense, I found meaningful. Again, all the John Holt books. And then all the Growing Without Schooling magazines and stories. Then I started interviewing young people who were unschooling at the time. And then, what has always worked for North Star is having large scale meetings with a panel presentation of 3 or 4 young people who did homeschool. And at our very first public meeting with 50, 60 kids at it, or families at it, we had a young person who was maybe 25, 26 at the time, who had unschooled and was a sound engineer, music production person, self-employed. We had a young woman who had opted out of school the year before and was thriving at 17 or 18 years old without completing high school in her personal life. And then we had a young woman who was like 15, who was currently in the throes of it, but had been homeschooling for 3-4 years by then, was super busy and doing all kinds of interesting things. And so you get these kids up there just being like, yeah, I don't go to school. What do you want? I began to realize it's kind of like the summer. Some people do camps. Some people do day camps. Some people do week-long camps. Some people do overnight camps. Some people do math camps. Some people do, fire building camp. We don't really judge each other or pay that much attention. You hope kids go someplace they like with people they like. And kids who don't do any camp, it's fine. So they stay at their house and they, dig dirt in the backyard and, play with their dogs and cats. We don't get all worked up about how kids spend the summer unless we feel like there's a mental health issue at stake. Then we do get worked up appropriately. And so, some kids like Little League and some kids don't. All right. Some kids like Scouts and some kids don't. Some kids like their religious youth groups and some kids don't. We don't really get bent out of shape over out of school choices, after school weekends, summers that kids make or parents make with their kids. And of course, different kids in the same family make vastly different choices about, hobbies and interests and how to pursue them. My brother was extraordinarily independent. He built a darkroom in our basement. He flew model airplanes, mostly by himself or with people he met there. He wasn't a joiner. He wasn't a group activity kind of fellow, right? My younger brother played sports. I did all kinds of group activities. Within the family, we're just following our sort of personal interests or personalities, and with the support of non-judgmental parents again, and a limited amount. We didn't have, it wasn't tons of resources. We were able to pursue what we wanted to do and go for it, right? And there, I forget. I'll stop.
I'm super curious. Are your parents still living?
Mm-hmm.
How
Yes,
have
they're
they
still in Shaker Heights,
reacted?
in the same house I grew up in. Hooray for
Yeah,
them. Yeah, 84 and
so
80.
so they must have had a story about how schools and learning worked. How have they reacted to your reshaping
Oh,
that
this is
story?
a great story. They liked school very much. They liked other summer camps. They both went to college, and but you know what? My parents are very independent. My dad, um, my grandfather had a jewelry store in Cleveland, and in the day after college was over, my dad went to work for my grandfather, and after about 13 years of working for him, he quit because he didn't see a future for himself in that store. And apparently, my grandfather was a bit of a tyrant. And my father opened up his own store in competition with his father. And if you imagine this in 1973, it was a shift to the suburbs. My grandfather's store was downtown Cleveland. My father's store was out in the suburbs. It was, and it worked out rather well for my dad in the end. But, that's a pretty independent streak of doing what you need to do for yourself, declaring independence. And then he looked at my mom and said, I need a bookkeeper. You're good with numbers. My mom's like, I didn't go to anybody's bookkeeper school. He's like, so what? You're good at this. And she became his bookkeeper for the next 30, 40 years. And thrived in it. It was a perfectly lovely situation. Um, they they're normal enough mainstream suburbanites with 3 kids who all went to college, and that they expected us all to go to college, and they weren't really, they're not cultural rebels. My parents are not, but they're also independent streakers. They're also entrepreneurial. They're also willing to question the system. And my older brother now lives in Australia, and he owns an inn. My younger brother is in Columbus. We're all pretty, independent characters, and it goes for my cousins, and it goes for my family as well. There's this entrepreneurial independent streak. So when I came home at Thanksgiving 1995 to tell my parents I was planning to resign my job and start a nonprofit with my friend Joshua to coach kids to homeschool. My parents knew nothing about homeschooling, and so it seemed a little bit odd, like I'm going off the deep end. But all they could say was, they would just look, oh, good, Kenny's starting his own business. And they saw it as an entrepreneurial declaration of independence, making things for myself and taking responsibility for my own happiness and launching a business. And they have been 100% supportive, both emotionally and financially, and just to have my back the entire time.
I've wondered why we don't treat learning like we treat food. You think of all of the entrepreneurship around food, the small restaurants, the different kinds of food, all of that. It seems like we do the equivalent of sending all of our kids to McDonald's when this food culture is so rich and vibrant.
Yes, I agree with that analogy very much. I also think it's a little, it's partly sending our kids to McDonald's, and it's partly making them shop at the most locally, stop and shop, or the conventional grocery store, right? The big box grocery store in your neighborhood, Kroger's or whatever it is, right? And maybe that grocery store has a little organic section or something now, but we don't support people to imagine they might live without the big box grocery store and only shop at farmers markets and CSAs and pick up a few things at the local grocery dudes, market. Um, you know, it's a lovely analogy, right? Um, I will say though that when I think about it too long and I play it out, it makes me think that if North Star and some of the self-directed learning models, some of these, early pioneers of homeschooling, unschooling, and some of the early alternative schools, Sudbury and so on, are like the mom and pop organic grocery, natural food stores of the 1970s, in people's garages and whatnot, that in the end, our movement is doomed to be overrun by the Whole Foods of the world. And that, some giant national tutoring center is going to come on the scene and coach everybody to homeschool. I fear that's what is happening with some of these pandemic pods and whatever, is that some big entity with resources is going to come in with their marketing expertise and appeal, and then get kids to do the more conventional version of what the thing is that we're trying to do. And in the end, it's going to be like, well, all right. Because, if you compare Whole Foods to the mainstream grocery store, it's not as different as the farmer's market, shall we say, right?
Yeah, that's probably a whole other discussion and a worthwhile one, because I think there's some inevitability to it, but it still represents a shift up in people's awareness of food. Things do change.
Yeah.
Well, let's
Yeah,
talk about that another time, because I want to ask you one more quick
sure.
question. You talked about the difference between you and your brothers.
Sure.
It feels to me like temperament is a largely underappreciated aspect of learning. That we actually come different. That we have that our brains are structured differently.
Yes, I think that's true. And, you know, one of the joys at North Star is that we support teens individually. So we are not dealing with, for the most part, North Star is not meeting or welcoming kids who are lifelong homeschoolers because their families all decided from the parents down back when they were 7 to homeschool. We are dealing with one kid in a family where the parents are both workers, and the kid has the teen has brothers and sisters who still go to school and even like it. And we're coaching this otherwise mainstream normal family to let the eccentric kid who doesn't like school to not go to school anymore, either for this year as an experiment or for the duration, you know, with long-term North Star, while the siblings still enjoy going to school and the parents still work in schools. Or, you know, we're not asking for a family to make a full-scale conversion to some kind of religion or anything, right? And so accommodating the one kid in the family who needs a different thing, or is, you know, really needs it, you know, just can't resign themselves to schooling through age 18, right? um is what we do. So that in that sense, yes, I mean, I think that it's a great joy. And even within North Star, then we got 50 kids here. Some of them want to do all our classes and they want to come every day and they want to have tons of relationships with all the adults, and then they're really busy. And some kids don't want any of that and they just want to not go to school, but they really just want to stay home and contemplate the world and wonder what's worth doing, and be pretty cautious about trying out anything until they're sure they really want to do it. And we get to indulge all those temperaments because, as a model, our program doesn't really require anything from anybody except to be nice when they're here, right? If you join your local health club or gym, they don't make you come, and they don't care which exercises you do when you're there, right? If you go to the public library, the librarian doesn't care, you know, as long as you follow the rules in the library, how you spend your time in the library and whether you take out books or videos or magazines or newspapers or what you do there, as long as you're just, you know, a decent citizen. So North Star has created a learning environment that is normal to the world, but very foreign to what we expect adolescent education to look like, right? So it's a real joy to meet each child and just, you know, allow their temperament to emerge or get to know them better and see how they make choices and what their pace is and how that interacts with their parents' fears and worries, um, and just take it one step at a time with each student, right? It's really fun.
That's so brilliant, Ken. I think we've pretty much answered this question, but the question of the conference is, what do you know about learning that would make a dramatic difference to parents and students at this time? Is there anything we haven't covered where you feel like is part of your kind of immediate message to parents?
I just have a much more optimistic take about learning. You know, my book is called School is Optional, Learning is Natural, School is Optional. And, you know, the optimistic part, learning is natural. People really do want to know stuff. They want to get good at stuff. People, you know, absent again, um, major mental health issues, people do want to learn. We're learning all the time and everything counts. And so learning to count what you love matters. When you learn to cook, when you learn to repair things at your house, when you're, you know, we tend to discount a lot of the things that we learn as well. No one measured it. No one gave me a certificate for it. And so it's not real. But then you look at adults who are doing things they love and getting paid for it. You're like, well, how'd you ever learn that? And, you know, most people don't go to school to become a, you know, radio disc jockey, you know, interview host, or, you know, I don't think you went to school to become a podcaster per se, right? Or a, you know, um, and so the hardest part of this process for me is creating the space for young people to declare their interest. It's really risky. When I meet a 15-year-old who hates school and I say, well, what do you really want to do then if you don't want to have to go to school? What do you really care about? What do you want to learn? They can be exceptionally wary because they know as soon as they say one thing, their parents are going to descend upon them with 42 books from the library and the bookstore and 17 people who know how to do that thing. And now they're expected to, like, jump in. And they were like, well, I was just saying that. Like, I like jazz music, but I mean, come on, relax over there, right? And then they learn to never say such things again because they don't want that experience to ever happen again. So kids learn to be wary of declaring interest. And so what happens is kids privately explore things, and then suddenly they come forth with this full-blown hobby that their parents didn't even know was like happening for them. And so having the space and the time and the privacy and the just safety to explore some things in a minor way without having overwhelming pressure that every little hobby has to be, potentially life direction, is hard. And so then therefore it's hard to get kids to even state their interests. And so when I can get a kid to say, well, I don't know, maybe I want to learn coding, or maybe I want to learn some French, or, I liked it the one time that I, baked the cake and it worked out. I wonder if I could do more baking, right? Just getting them to say that much can be really hard. And so that's, I think that's the of all things we haven't said, I would just say that creating the safe space for children to declare an interest without a lot riding on it is really hard. I mean, I'm a parent, I'm guilty, of overwhelming my children's mutterings with too much enthusiasm. I know what I'm talking about, both personally and from what I've witnessed, right? So, but that's the hardest part. I mean, otherwise, I have a book and that school is optional as a credential, that school is optional for learning. People, you've heard me say that, that. Those are other major ideas. But and that school is optional in a positive way, that I wish people who want to choose school can choose school. That's fine too. I say all those things elsewhere. So the new one simply is just how hard it is to help to create this space for someone to declare an interest. That's what I would say.